All right, perfect. Thank you, Tommy. And I'm going to repeat it probably frequently throughout today. This is to start bringing people up to speed on just things like terminology and concepts. We know it's very different to go, to have a zero emission fleet than a diesel fleet. There are more things that you need to think about. There are things that you need to plan for. And we're trying to give people enough information that they understand that, as we move through today and the next session, we're not going to be able to plan things for your specific fleet, but we want to try and give you as much information as possible on what you need to do. So this will be pretty high level, but as I said, a lot of information, and we'll be diving into more. So next slide, please, Tony. All right, perfect. Just a quick overview of what we're going to do. Going to talk a little bit about battery and electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Again, just to get you used to what are these things? I mean, all right, a battery vehicle has a battery in it. I got that. But there's some other things that are important to know. We're going to talk about the benefits and some drawbacks, a little bit of both of those, again, at a high level. And then we'll switch over to some project planning discussion. The types of things that you need to start thinking about, especially if you're going to be doing things like putting in your own infrastructure, or just planning what kind of vehicles you need. Next slide, please, Tommy. All right, so a battery electric vehicle, what is it? Obviously, as I said a moment ago, it's got a battery in it. You charge the battery up, and that is basically now, your engine, if you will. But so it runs on electricity. It has no tailpipe emissions. And important to know, as California's grid gets cleaner, which it is all the time, and we'll discuss that in the next session a month or so from now, we come closer and closer to complete zero emissions all the way across the board. But remember, one of the things really important to remember is, as I said, they use batteries as sole source of power for vehicle movement and auxiliary power such as heat and air. But one really, really nice thing about electric vehicles, both fuel cell and battery, if you're not moving, the only things that they're using power for are air and or heat. Which is relatively minor compared to the draw on the battery to drive the vehicle. If you're stopped, they're shut down. It's not like idling with a diesel vehicle where you're still using fuel. All right, so a BEV uses an electric motor instead of an engine, a battery pack instead of a fuel tank. Right? So they have to be plugged in to recharge regularly. Right? These vehicles are actually very, very efficient, much more efficient than an internal combustion engine. This allows, you can compare, we won't get too deeply into this, but you can pretty easily compare using what's called a miles per gallon equivalent. You may have seen that, an MPGe. You can compare the efficiency of a diesel vehicle to that of an electric vehicle. Again, we're not going to go into any of that, but there are comparisons out there. Another common term that you're going to hear is per kilowatt hour, miles per kilowatt hour. I've asked people, and I didn't expect them to know the answer to the question I'm about to pose here. I didn't until a couple, 3 years ago. I've asked people, what does it mean when you read the specs on a vehicle and it says I have 100 kilowatt hour battery? What's that 100 kilowatt hour mean? And the answer I typically get is, I really don't know. And I didn't know until I got forced into this stuff. I've learned a lot. It's been exciting, but I didn't know that. What it is, it's really no different than the gallons of diesel in your tank. Gallons of diesel in your tank, kilowatt hours in your battery, same thing. If you know how many miles per kilowatt hour you're going to get, you look at how big your battery is, you can calculate how many miles you're going to get out of a full battery, just like if it was a diesel tank. You get 5 miles to the gallon out of that diesel. You have a 100-gallon tank. What are you going to get on 100 gallons? You're going to get, you're going to get 500 miles on it, right? So it's the same idea. Let's move to the next slide, Tony. Really quickly, that's just the platform of a battery electric vehicle. Not going to go into any details here, but you'll notice there's not a big engine anywhere. There's not a lot of things that you'll find on your diesel vehicle. Next slide, please, Tommy. Fairly quickly on charging, all right? Because that's going to be really important to you. Let's talk a little bit about it. As I mentioned before, a battery electric vehicle, you need to leave it plugged in to charge. The amount of time it takes to charge really depends on the power output of the charging station and the vehicle's ability to take a charge. I'm going to use a couple terms I haven't introduced yet, but it's a good time to at least throw these out here. Let's say you're at a 350 kilowatt charger. That's great. You might say, well, I can take 300. Again, I know you may not get all these conversions right now. Don't worry about it if you don't. But you can say, well, I can take 350 kilowatts of charging power into my battery. Maybe not. It depends on what the vehicle can take. A lot of vehicles may only be able to take 150 or 250 kilowatts. So even though you're on a really fast charger, you may be limited by what your vehicle can accept. That's really what you need to take away from this. They have really complex systems that allow them to charge, and it's based on a lot of factors. Temperature, battery capacity. As you get fuller on a battery, as your battery gets closer to 100% charged, it takes more time to charge it. That last 20% takes more time than, getting from 20 to 80. It's just the physics of batteries. But basically, the higher the station's output, the faster the charging. Okay? I also want to give you a quick overview of the different types of charging stations. You see a number of plugs on the slide. Don't worry about that. We just want to show you there are different technologies out there, but basically there's three types of chargers. There's a level 1 charger. That's what you would plug into your wall socket to charge your car at home. Very slow. It's about 1.5, certainly under 2 kilowatts per hour of charge. So it takes a long time. You have a 100 kilowatt battery. That'll take you 50 hours to charge it up. Like first you have a 20 kilowatt battery in a hybrid. It'd take you overnight. You basically fill that battery up. Level 2 charging is still something that's used often at home. That plugs into your 240. Just like your oven runs off of, your air conditioner, it runs off of 240. That can run as fast as almost 20 kilowatts an hour. So that's pretty good for cars and even lighter duty trucks. Again, if you had a 100 kilowatt battery and you were charging it at 20 kilowatts an hour, well, 5 hours, really not 5 because there are inefficiencies, it'd be a little more, but maybe 6 hours or so, you'd fill that battery up, all right? So that's important to keep in mind as we move through this, because many of you may be thinking, I'm going to have to use these huge fast chargers. You may not need to. Lastly, we have what are called DC fast chargers. Those are the ones that do run up to 350, 500, 600, I believe is in the field now, kilowatts. There are even megawatt chargers with ranges over 1,000 kilowatts that are pretty close to getting out there right now. All right, next slide, Tony. What's a fuel cell electric truck? Again, not going to go through it too much, but you see a picture of it here. Fuel cell truck, it's not that different than a battery truck, except instead of charging the battery, you use hydrogen in a fuel cell to generate the electricity that then is fed into the battery. Again, zero tailpipe emissions, 2 to 4 times more efficient than a diesel. And the nice thing about these, maybe the biggest advantage, is battery can take a while to charge. These you pull into a hydrogen station, in 10 to 15 minutes, you filled up just like you would your diesel. You're on the road and off you go. All right, let's move to the next slide, Tommy. Just again, fuel cell platform. You'll see the little fuel cells in there. That's hydrogen tanks and a fuel cell in there. Really minimal, and they're a lot lighter weight than a battery. We know batteries have, are fairly heavy. Next slide, please, Tommy. Where to fuel? I don't expect you to go here and look now. Some of these may or may not be available for heavy duty vehicles, but just to give you an idea, there's some good information out there. Here's a link for this one. It's a Fed government site that gives you information on fueling stations where they are, both hydrogen and electric, right now throughout the country. All right, next slide, please, Tommy. So what are some comparisons here? And I've mentioned it a little bit, like a kilowatt hour is the same as the gallons of gas in your gallons of diesel in your tank. But just to give you an idea, when we talk about a fuel cell, it's just an engine. Hydrogen tanks and battery pack, again, that's your fuel tank. It's how much energy you've got to use up, how many gallons you have, how many kilowatt hours you have, how many kilograms of hydrogen. Right? Electric drivetrain, same as your powertrain and transmission. Although there are those, I shouldn't say there are, electric vehicles use purpose-built electric drivetrains, much more efficient, just a kind of, better. It's much more efficient. It makes your vehicle, it takes advantage of the electricity to its full potential. Battery management system, batteries have to stay cool. All right. That's just like your radiator. So when you hear somebody talk about battery management system, just think, oh, that's what's keeping my batteries cool. You want your batteries to stay cool. One, they charge a lot faster. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Tommy. All right. Here are some benefits of the two technologies. Excuse me. So first of all, I mentioned this earlier. Higher fuel efficiency. I'm not going to sit and do the math for you right now, but trust me, I've done the math when it comes to cost and fuel efficiency. At least for electric right now, it's a lot cheaper to run hydrogen as the price comes down, which we think it will. There's a lot of money right now for hydrogen, what's called hydrogen hubs, which California is vying for one of those, and we'll probably get one. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, they have a big hydrogen project that they're starting up. So hydrogen price, as demand goes up, just like with anything, supply is as supply goes up, price is going to go down. And with the price of diesel today, it's getting closer and closer to being competitive on the hydrogen side. So, as I said, more efficient. And with electric vehicles, frequent stopping and starting like you do around town is actually a good thing. You have regenerative braking. If you don't know what that is, basically your battery to drive the vehicle is using a little generator, a motor in that case, to drive you. As you brake, that motor turns into a generator, and it helps slow you down. Think of it kind of as at least my dad used to call it a Jake brake. I suppose that's still what it's called. It's basically using the compression in your engine to slow you down. Only in this case, you're using the resistance of that motor when you're slowing down to actually generate new electricity. That helps keep it that way, or keep it even more efficient and less expensive. We have something called the low carbon fuel standard. We will talk about that in a little more detail at the very end of the day. But basically, the low carbon fuel standard is a way, and we'll talk about it a little later in this presentation, but it is something that may provide you some funds just for using things like hydrogen, things like electricity. Go into it later. Something else that's a big plus to electric vehicles, the maintenance is far less on an electric vehicle. Right? Way fewer moving parts. You don't have hundreds to thousands of moving parts that you might in a conventional vehicle. Less parts to break down. You don't have engine oil. You don't have transmission oil. You don't have fluids to change. Very few. There are some, I believe. Power steering, I think, is one. I'm not even sure about that, to be honest. But much less maintenance to do. And the brakes last a lot longer because of this regenerative braking thing that I just mentioned, right? You're not using your brakes only to slow you down. You're using regenerative braking. And if you don't know, that's how trains, we're talking locomotives, that's their main source of slowing down, is this regenerative braking. It's not as much regenerative braking, but it's resistance of the electric drive motors. All right. I've driven a Class 6. It was really cool. I drove a Class 6 diesel years and years and years ago, did a little delivery, different world. You don't have emissions when you're idling. You don't have the vibrations. And it, for me, felt a lot safer because of this regenerative braking. You can stop a lot quicker, and it's just more comfortable. Again, you don't have the vibrations. Drivers tend to really like these once they get used to them. And last, battery costs of vehicles. And I know I'm talking about batteries a lot today because most of the vehicles out there are battery right now, but we see the same again, with hydrogen. Only again, it's not dependent on a battery, but battery costs are declining. Since 2010, battery costs have dropped by about 90%. I don't know where fuel cell cost is. The vehicle is still a little bit more than even battery. I don't know if they're declining, but as I said, we expect that the price of hydrogen will decline greatly. Next slide, please, Tommy. All right, here's some purchase considerations. Just going to go through them really quick. As everybody knows, I'm not going to try and hide it. They are more expensive to buy up front, although you'll be hearing about a lot of incentive programs, the low carbon fuel standard, things like that, that'll help defray a lot of that cost. But they are cheaper to run in the long run. They're really good for depot charging right now. And that is something that you need to think about as you charge, to have a place to charge them overnight. That's a big positive. I'm not going to run through all of these right now. Just know that there are things that you need to think about that we will be hearing more about over the next sessions, rest of today, and then the next session, that you really do need to think about. Like I said, with depot charging, can you depot charge? Electricity demand charge and management. I mean, how are you going to do that? You don't want to charge the vehicle when electricity is the most expensive. There are ways to manage that. Things that you're going to hear about as time goes on in these sessions. Fuel cells, they really hold a lot of promise. As I said earlier, fast fueling, but right now the stations are limited, and there's no range anxiety. Just like with your diesel, you pop in, you fill up. Battery electric, right now, many more choices. Widespread charging and getting wider all the time. I mean, more and more companies, especially in the heavy duty world, are jumping in. But they have a variable range. You need to think about that. You might get away with a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack rather than 150. That's going to save you a lot of money. So you need to think about, what do I actually need? We're going to talk about that a little bit in just a moment here, again, at a high level. Next slide, please, Tommy. All right, how to get started with zero emissions. We're going to talk about that a little bit more on the vehicle side. Tommy, next slide. As I said a minute ago, it's not like a diesel. We get that. It's harder. Yeah, I shouldn't say harder. You have to plan for more things you need to consider, especially as this is new, and especially if you're going to be putting in your own charging infrastructure. All right. So first of all, it requires some pre-planning. But if you ask a lot of these questions up front, you can streamline that process. You can save money, and you can avoid a lot of headaches. And upfront is the key here, especially if you have some compliance deadlines coming up. The sooner you start, the better, especially when it comes to like your utility. But in your planning process, budgeting, looking at what you need for vehicles and so forth, start as early as you can. A lot of this next section is built on lessons that we've learned from all the various demos and pilot projects that CARB incentive funding has paid for, and that's a lot. And we've learned a lot of information. We've learned it. The fleets that have taken advantage of the funding have really put a lot of work into it. And so those lessons, some of them were learned the hard way. Hopefully you won't have to learn them the hard way because of all that pre-work. So some of the initial questions, though, that you might want to ask: how far do you typically drive? Are you doing local deliveries and trips? Maybe 50 to 150 miles a day. And again, I'm just trying to give you some concepts here. Oh, I got to think about that, because that's all going to impact the vehicles that you buy, how you phase them into your fleet, what kind of charging that you need. It does take some planning. When do you have the downtime for the vehicle? Like, I mentioned depot charging earlier. Can you depot charge the vehicle? Can you opportunity charge? That's when you just pull in for some period of time, for an extended amount of time. How much opportunity charging? And again, you're going to hear about all this stuff as we go on, but how much opportunity charging will you need to take advantage of? Depot charging, opportunity charging, two really important terms to think about and remember, so that when you hear them as we go on, it'll start to click if you don't know about those. Is the vehicle coming back to the yard or depot after every shift? Again, depot charging, very important there. Does it get right back on the road when the next shift? Those are things that you have to consider in the vehicle. I'm sorry, in the types of vehicle that you're going to purchase and the types of infrastructure that you may need. Let's see. Briefly, I want to talk about some of the other things that you might need to consider. And as I said, we'll go through these a little more detail later, and then more as these sessions go on. But briefly, what are your deployment lead times? Months or longer. How much time do you need to plan to get these on the road? Do you have facility upgrades that you need to make to get enough power? Can you anticipate adding more vehicles in the future? That's really important here. Okay? Because if you're putting in your own infrastructure, if you just put in a little bit right now, you might have to tear up concrete and do all kinds of things. Well, if you know you're going to put in more in 5 years, it may be really worthwhile to just tear that concrete up once, tear that parking lot up once, because it's a lot cheaper if you just do it once, right? So thinking about what the future plans to future-proof, that's really important. Look at your utilities websites and engage with them early. As I said a minute ago, one of our mantras with all of this: start early, start early, start early, especially with utilities. Next slide, please, Tommy. All right. What are some of the needs of your fleet? So why are you going zero emission? Maybe your fleet has some corporate I can't say that word today, sustainability goals. A lot of corporations do. This may be fitting into that, and that may impact when and how you electrify. You recognize there's new technology on the way, and you want to get a demonstration so you can start figuring everything out. Especially as you get closer to compliance deadlines, funding may not be as available for you. So you might want to jump on it right away. Is your fleet growing in the next few years? As I just mentioned, the kind of thing to take into consideration as you plan. What are my fleet's needs? And as many of you know, the final deadline for truck and bus is coming up. So if you have some of those vehicles that are going to have to get off the road, maybe you want to start looking at electrifying some of them now, especially if you know you're going to be subject to the advanced clean fleet regulation. Right? Some other questions. What are your operational goals? Leads to some details. This will lead to some detailed planning. Like, okay, how am I really going to integrate these vehicles into my operations and dispatch? At first, maybe you have some vehicles with lower mileage capability. Well, those are the ones that you're going to use on more local routes. Right? Are your drivers minimally trained? Training is important with electric vehicles to get the most efficiency out of them. Driving them the right way is you can drive them any way you want, but if you really want to get them the efficiency and the full benefit of them being a much more efficient vehicle, your driver should be trained. Do you have maintenance staff that have just some basic troubleshooting training? Just being able to swap out a basic fuse can be the difference between something you can do quick on site, or your truck being in the shop and waiting for a manufacturer's mechanic to come out. And by the way, there are more and more training programs starting up for folks like technicians. Technicians in this case being basically the equivalent of a mechanic, infrastructure installers, and so forth. So that's a big job market for folks out there, and there'll be more and more available to you as that happens. A lot of community colleges are actually gearing up and leveraging that existing training program that they have for these new technologies. Finally, last thing on this slide, one thing that we found is that a lot of those early demonstration fleets I mentioned earlier, that we've had incentive funding for, a lot of those have sorry, lost my train of thought here. A lot of those have realized that they were growing faster than they thought they would, and are going to add more zero-emission vehicles than they thought they would quicker. So pre-planning, as I said, really, really important. Mentioned a moment ago, it's trenching in your truck yard is expensive, but if you do it once, yeah, you have a little more trenching, but all of that prep work, everything that needs to be done just to start, all the planning, that's already done. You don't have to do it all twice. Plus, you might find out that you've got some on-site utility upgrades that if you did it at one time, it's cheaper than doing it over and over. All right, next slide, please, Tommy. All right, so again, there's planning involved. I know you've heard me say that a bunch of times, but I'll probably continue to say it because it's critical. And you really need a team. And, also know that right now, I'm assuming that most of the folks on this call are the larger fleets. Smaller fleets, a lot of this information is going to be helpful to you too. But we know that a lot of the smaller fleets are going to need, public charging availability. There's more and more of that coming along. But many of the things that we talk about, like planning your routes, things like that, are still very applicable to you, even if you don't think you can have your own charging infrastructure. And we're not talking about infrastructure today, but you're going to find out there may be ways that you don't even realize where you could actually have your own infrastructure available to you, even if you're a small fleet. But you need to build a team, and it's really, really critical that you have a cross-functional team for success, again, especially of these big projects. You're going to run into roadblocks and challenges. So having a dedicated team with the buy-in that are kind of excited about this technology will be the best way to move forward. And there are a lot of folks in fleets that are really interested in this. That internal champion, that's someone that's interested. If you have that, that's a great person to kind of head up the team, tap into them. Some common team participants, your fleet managers, the executive, the owner, your electric utility, definitely part of your team, dealer, vehicle manufacturer, the charger manufacturers or installers, if you're putting chargers in, maybe a design and engineering firm or a consulting firm, again, especially if it's a big project. I know that that's not cheap, but you'll find them invaluable. You'll be hearing more about that, probably not today, but in the next session that we have a month or so from now. And any permitting agencies that you need to talk to. Next slide, please, Tommy. And we're getting there, I promise. As I said, a lot of information. I hope you're not trying to write everything down. It's just so you start hearing these terms, thinking about them, jot down just the most basic terms so that you're familiar with them. All right. Utility, I've mentioned a number of times. Really important that you contact them right up front. Maybe you're one of the very first people that you need to contact, right? And I want to stress this again, contact them early, because talking to their staff at the onset of the planning process is critical. They can let you know what kind of things you need to think about, what kind of understanding of the build-out requirements, cost development timelines, rates and demand charges. That may be one you don't even get right now. That's really critical to help you maximize your cost to benefit ratio. And incentives for infrastructure. A lot of the utilities have incentives. The big IOUs, IOUs being really PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, and SoCal Electric, have some funding that may help you as you put in infrastructure. So some utility considerations: evaluate the existing infrastructure. How much power do you have already, and what are your needs going to be? And the utility can help you with that. Now, again, they can tell you how much power you have relatively accessible already. The grid can vary from location to location. I know a company that I heard talk recently, they were putting in about 7 or 8 megawatts of charging at their facility. They were talking to the utility. Utility said, we can give you 7 megawatts right now. What they didn't ask is, well, could you give me 12? They didn't need 12, but the answer might be, we can't give you 12 right now. We need to put in maybe even a new substation. Who knows? There are things like that to consider. But talk to them early, often. You can learn a lot, and they will give you a lot of help moving forward. Let's go on to the next slide, Tommy. All right, choosing a vehicle. And I am getting short on my time, so I hope I don't have to skip over these too much. But as I said, we're going to talk about all these things in much more detail as time goes on. This is just to get you used to some stuff. But a lot of manufacturers, as I said earlier, a lot of the big manufacturers, most of them now, have zero-emission models, and more on the way. So you can check with your regular dealer, or you can startups, because they're not startups. They're companies like BYD, like Nikola, that have been around for a while. They're building a track record to some degree or another. They're just not the ones that you may be used to. But there's some great vehicles out there on all counts, on the manufacturers that have been around forever, and on those newer manufacturers that have really been on the cutting edge. A lot of those manufacturers will help you do things like modeling your fleet. You probably should model the typical routes of a vehicle. All right, we'll talk a little bit about route planning at some later time, but you really should start looking at that, because that'll tell you where you can start moving vehicles into your fleet the most efficiently, the most effectively. Right. And as I said, there are free calculators online. The utilities may be able to help you. Obviously, consulting firms and so forth will help you. But this ensures that there's enough range each day for the vehicles that you have, that you're using them most efficiently. And things like range are growing all the time. We're up to 500 and 600 kilowatt hour battery packs now. They're not common yet, but even in most manufacturers will offer a 200 to 250 kilowatt hour battery pack. That'll get you somewhere around 100 to 150 miles of range. There's some great resources out there. There's a couple here. One from one of our partners, CalStart. They are a great organization. They do a lot of work for a number of state agencies. They have a lot of great information. Our HVIP program, HVIP, they also help with that. They administer that, but CARB oversees that as well. Great information there on the types of vehicles that are out there. I'd go there and check those websites out. Next slide, please, Tommy. All right, I mentioned HVIP. Want to just touch on a couple of funding programs. This is probably the biggest zero-emission technology funding program out there right now. And this is for vehicles. One of the things you'll hear about, I think, later today, and you should be really aware of it, I mentioned utilities have some incentive programs for infrastructure. The California Energy Commission also has incentive programs for infrastructure. And we don't even know for sure what's coming down from the federal government in the last 2 huge bills that have passed, the Job Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money for these type of things there. All right. But here's the HVIP website. As I said, there, and next slide, please, Tommy. Here, the ZETI tool. Both of them have a lot of really good information about the types of vehicles that are out there, a little bit about some pluses and minuses, but this will really help you just to get an idea of, this might be a vehicle that works for me. So as I've been saying, just to get you used to this stuff, you'll be hearing more about it, but these are tools that you're probably going to want to keep in your tool belt. All right, next slide, Tommy. All right. Infrastructure needs. Sorry. A lot of things to think about. Your needs are going to vary. Depends on your fleet size, depends on the technology and the charging equipment you're using. The costs vary quite a bit. There may be utility upgrades. In many cases, the utilities have to pay for those upgrades on their side transformers, possibly even new new stations. Questions to think about: where are you going to charge? How does it fit into your site use patterns? As I mentioned earlier, are you coming back to the same place every night? Maybe depot charging is a great option, and maybe you can use slower chargers to depot charge overnight. Right? That all can save you money. Slower chargers, smaller batteries, less expensive. Right? Permitting, local building departments, you may need to talk to them. What kind of charging is out there? There's a lot of terms. I'm going to mention smart charging, charge management right now. Not going to go into them for the interest of time, but remember those terms, smart charging and charge management. They're really going to be important to help you do this the most efficiently, as efficiently as possible. Do this being charge your vehicle. All right, next slide, Tommy. All right, timelines. I'm not going to talk about them too much, but do be aware. That's why you need to start planning. You'll see on that slide, it says development and construction, 6 to 48 months. I know 48 sounds like crazy, right? That's if there's a new substation that needs to go in, just a lot of utility upgrades. What I've heard from a lot of the fleets, in fact, many fleets, large projects, about 18 months. So you really need, if you think you're going to need to go electric 2 years from now, you should be starting the process right now. How about the next slide, Tommy? Again, interest of time, I won't go into it too much here. You can take a look. You have the slides, but here's a cost comparison. You will see that the upfront cost, as I mentioned, is more expensive. But as you go on, the costs decrease a lot. You'll see here, conventional diesel, net vehicle cost, residual value is about $60,000. Fuel cost over that 12-year period, over $110,000. Maintenance, almost $100,000. Other costs, $10,000 or $11,000. Total over 12 years, $275,000. Battery electric vehicle, right? Initial net cost, and we're including, incentives and so forth in here, I believe. But the initial net cost and residual is about $92,000. Right? I know that the upfront costs a lot more than that, but again, there are things that get that cost down. Fuel costs, that same period, it was all over $100,000 for the diesel vehicle. It's less than $3,000 here for electricity. Maintenance, about $70,000 instead of over 90. Other costs, about $12,000. Infrastructure, about $24,000. 12-year time period cost, $202,000. $75,000 cheaper than the diesel vehicle. All right, let's move on to the next slide, Tommy. Costs and financing. How you finance this infrastructure, the vehicle and the infrastructure. Are you going to be able to use incentives, HVIP, VW funds, Moyer? We'll talk about those more later. This LCFS, low carbon fuel standard, that comes into play. Again, talk about that later. There are ongoing savings that you're going to have, and you can find rate calculators. Again, I believe that a number of the utilities have rate calculators. Go to your utility, whether you be in SMUD, where I am in Sacramento, or SoCal Edison down in Southern California, or LADWP. A lot of them have information, especially those big independent investor-owned utilities such as SoCal Edison, PG&E, and San Diego Gas and Electric. All right, let's move on, Tommy. Quick guide summary. We've mentioned a lot of these things. This just summarizes it nicely. All right, get your team together. Identify your vehicles. What are you going to do at your yard? What do you need to do to put charging infrastructure in? Can you do it at that yard? Are there other ways to do it? Plans for fueling, deployment, phasing in the vehicles, and rebates, incentive fundings, right? Engineering designs and costs. Again, things that you have to think about. Permitting, build out of infrastructure. You're matching the truck delivery and the charger sign off. Okay, you buy trucks today and the manufacturer says we'll get them to you in a year or 7 months, but the infrastructure is going to take you 18 months to put in. What are those trucks going to do for all that time, right? You got to think about the timing of those things and ensure driver and maintenance staff training. All right, next slide, Tommy. And that is it. Thank you very much. I know there was a lot of information there. I know we had to run through it pretty quickly, but you will hear all those terms more as we move through this. Hopefully this was